More time, we talk about a lot of things that are kind of funny, kind of interesting, but we don't have a lot of time. We're already running late, so I want to honor your time and your commitment. But what I really want to do today is challenge you to think about leadership in a different way. I want you to think about having the courage to lead and what that really means. That means to be the kind of person that stands apart, a person who stands firm on things like the four-way test. Leadership is not a position, although it can be. So often it's described as being a CEO or being a general or a manager or a coach. But absolutely, those are true, and yet, whether you have that role or not, you can be a leader. You can have influence in your community and in your school. And I'm a simple guy. I come from the country. How many of you folks, some of you guys are from Jasper, the Jasper Club? Where are you from? Walker County? Right on. My family's all from Walker County. We're from a part of the country way out in the country, a little place called Coon Creek, which you may not have heard of before. It's home to a lot of, suspicious characters, if we might say, some of my family members. And when I was out there as a kid, there were things that we'd say, we live so far out, we hunted towards town, and that we were always worried about our place in the world and how we were perceived and what went on in other parts of the world. But growing up there and spending time there, I learned some things about values that were very important. And I learned about the importance of really understanding and defining things like leadership. It's not a position. It's really something that answers the four-way test with a resounding yes. If you remember, the four-way test talks about the things that you think and the things that you do and the things that you say. And that's a pretty hard task to think about leadership in terms of how I think and what I say. It's more than just telling people what to do, which is one way it's been described. It's more than just telling people what to do and having them enjoy it, which is another way it's been described. Leadership is answering yes to the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendship? And is it beneficial to all concerned? You see, if you're behaving in that manner, if you're thinking in that manner, then you're a leader. You're going to have the opportunity to lead. You may not have the job as president. You may not be captain of the football team, captain of the basketball team. I wasn't. I did play, but I wasn't captain. But I had the opportunity to lead, not just in what I said, but how I practiced and how I did things and how I treated other people on my team. You see, leadership is about influence in relationships. It's not just about holding a position. So that's what we need to talk about when we talk about leadership. And when we talk about courage, most of us would define courage as the absence of fear. Is there anyone in this room who has never been afraid? Great, we're all telling the truth. I would suggest to you that courage is not the absence of fear. In fact, courage is not possible in the absence of fear. Courage happens when you're at risk. I'm a banker. I deal with risk every day. Bankers, by the way, have been described as a man who would loan you an umbrella when the sun was shining and ask for it back when it began to rain. I'm not that kind of banker. But you have to think about how you're going to act and have the courage to act appropriately, to do the right thing and to take the risk of being in a position that you might be a scapegoat. You might be scorned by some of your peers. You might be put at physical risk sometimes. Leadership requires courage. It requires the risk of your reputation and your acceptance and your comfort sometimes. Ask your parents. They, as leaders in their family, with you, have to risk your displeasure sometimes. They have to risk you being upset to take care of you. Quite frankly, there's times when it's very difficult as a parent to be a leader. Can I get an amen from this side of the house? And sometimes, when you're on the team, it's a little frustrating with the leadership you're getting. Can I get an amen from this side of the house? Amen. You're nodding your head a little too vigorously. Your mom would like to know that, whoever you... Yeah, y'all are awake out there. So courage is not the absence of fear. It's the willingness to step in and do what is right when it's called for, to answer the questions of the four-way test. Yes, yes, yes. From the position that you hold. And like I said, I'm a simple guy. I like things that have an example for me. I like to be able to see an example, a tangible example of someone who has demonstrated leadership. And I look at history, I read an awful lot, and I found 3 or 4 really good examples. By the way, I'm going to take my watch off. I don't know what time I began. Do you know what it means when a speaker takes his watch off and puts it down over here? It means absolutely nothing. So I'll be done shortly, I hope. Good examples of leadership in history, I think there's 3. 2 of them you're going to know very well. A third one you might not know at all. One is a man from this country. One is a man from South Africa, and another is a young lady from Pakistan. Nelson Mandela is a great example of leadership. He is considered the father of Africa. He became president of Africa, and in 1990 he won the Nobel Peace Prize. But before that he was considered a terrorist. And before that he spent 27 years in prison because he was standing against a philosophy called apartheid, in which people of color did not have the same opportunities as people of non-color. He stood against an oppressive system and quite frankly carried out some acts of violence for which he was imprisoned and became ultimately a political prisoner. Now we should do well to keep in mind that while Nelson Mandela was in prison, the founders of this nation were considered rebels. They were enemies of the crown. They were considered criminals, and had we not won, most of them would have hung. Ben Franklin understood that very well when he said at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we must all hang together, but we shall surely all hang separately. Leadership requires courage. And Nelson Mandela manifested that, as did Ben Franklin and the signers of the Declaration of Independence. All those people together understood what leadership was. They risked everything: fame, fortune, position, physical safety. They risked it all. Another man you'll be quite familiar with, we just celebrated Martin Luther King's Day. Profound impact on this country. Most of you were born, well, you were all born in a completely different time. And while this nation is far from perfect, had it not been for Martin Luther King, it would be far more imperfect. He stood against oppression and mistreatment of people of color again, people who were disadvantaged and discriminated against, after rising from small and quaint beginnings as a spiritual leader only, but over time the character, the fiber of his character is what drew people to him and drew him to stand in the face of opposition, to put him in risk and his family at risk of physical violence and ultimately to lose his life. He stood against things that were institutionalized and wrong. And you'll have that chance. But when Martin Luther King started, when Nelson Mandela started, nobody knew anything about them. And nobody knew anything about Malala Yousafzai. If I'm saying her name correctly, I hope I've got it right. I am a country boy. Young lady from Pakistan last year, perhaps some of you have heard about her. She blogged about the right for women in Pakistan to learn, to go to school and to be educated, equally with men. She did it anonymously initially, and ultimately she did it publicly by the encouragement of her father. And for that, one day when she was headed out on a bus last year, members of the Taliban rushed on board the bus and shot her and tried to kill her. She was not killed. They tried to kill her. They threatened to continue to try to kill her for what she stands for. She was 14 years old. How old are you guys? 7. 14 years old, you're 16, 17, 18 years old. You can have a profound impact from your position, particularly in this age, in a media age. You know, I grew up in a time when we didn't have iPads and iPhones. We had something called the Columbia Record Club, Columbia House Record Club. They mailed you a record every month if you got on their list, right? Some of you have heard about that. We had the finest athletic shoe available when I played basketball was a Chuck Taylor Converse All-Star. Things are a little different now. And we didn't have Axe body spray. You look like a guy that might have some Axe body spray in your, no? We had this thing called Brute Splash-On Lotion. Look, my dad's over here going, yeah. I wore it every Friday night with the disco chain and whatever else I had to go. Lewis, you got yours still? Yeah. So, these are great examples of people who at very young ages and throughout their lives had a tremendous impact on what was going on. And you might be asking yourself, well, how can I do that? Where will I have that platform? How can I make a change in my world? And you can do that very simply by getting up every day and being the kind of person that answers the four-way test with a resounding yes. You can do it when you encounter people who are mistreating others in your schools. When there's bullying going on, when there's other types of things going on, the mistreatment of people for how they look, how they act, for what their intellect is, for how they play a particular sport. I couldn't dunk a basketball until I was 12 years old. No, I couldn't dunk a basketball until I was about 17. And I took a lot of ridicule for that, even though I was 6'4", because, you know, all this grew awfully fast and I couldn't get to the rim the way other guys could. And I took a lot of grief for that. But I had a guy on my team that kept encouraging me over and over and over again until I was able to do what he could do with a basketball. Two-handed, over the head, a lot of different things. Can't do it anymore. But I got encouraged by a guy who, when other people would ridicule me for being that tall and unable to do it, he'd say, hey, you'll get there. It'll come. You have the opportunity